Hi everyone, welcome to the Story Times. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. I was at home, stretched out on the couch, half watching the news when my phone buzzed beside me. I picked it up, noting the unfamiliar number before answering. Hello? Is this James Carter? A man's voice asked, professional but urgent. Yes, I said, sitting up slightly. I'm calling from St. Vincent's Hospital. Your wife, Sophia Carter, has been badly burned in a house fire. She's been admitted, and we need you to come down immediately. That's not possible, I said, shaking my head, even though the caller couldn't see me. Sophia's in Chicago. She left yesterday on a business trip. There was a brief pause on the other end. Sir, we have her ID. The woman admitted gave her name as Sophia Carter. We need you to. That's not my wife, I cut in firmly. You've made a mistake. And without waiting for another word, I ended the call. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Sophia's father. I answered, keeping my voice steady. Hello? James, his voice was tight, anxious. Has Sophia called you? I hesitated for the briefest second. I don't know. I said finally. A pause. She hasn't called me either, he murmured, almost to himself. Maybe she's just busy, I offered casually. You know how she is. He exhaled heavily. Yeah, maybe. We exchanged a few more words before hanging up. I placed the phone on the table and leaned back in my chair. My eyes drifted to the kitchen. A slow smile spread across my lips as I rose to my feet, walked over, and poured myself a cup of coffee. I had just taken a sip of my coffee when my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Valeria, the wife of Jason Cole. My wife's boss. The man she'd been sleeping with for the last 3 months. I let the phone ring a few times before answering. Hello? For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then, in a voice that was calm, almost amused, Valeria spoke. The bird is cooked. I felt a slow, deliberate smile tug at the corners of my lips. And then, just like that, the line went dead. It was 2 weeks ago when Valeria showed up at my office unannounced. I had barely looked up from my desk when she walked in, dressed in black, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. There was something chillingly composed about her, the kind of calm that made men uneasy. She sat down without being invited and placed a folder on my desk. You should see this, she said, her voice smooth, almost bored. I hesitated before reaching for it. But the moment I flipped it open, my stomach twisted. Text messages, hundreds of them. My wife's words, sickeningly sweet, filled with promises, confessions, and desire. Then came the voice recordings. I pressed play on one. I can't wait to feel you inside me again, Jason. I clenched my jaw. Valeria leaned back in the chair, watching me. Keep going, she instructed. I did. The next files were videos, grainy, but clear enough. My wife, Sophia, in various hotel rooms, tangled in sheets that weren't ours, with a man who wasn't me. I closed the folder, exhaling through my nose. My pulse hammered, but I refused to let her see it. Valeria tilted her head. So, she said, crossing one leg over the other. What are you going to do? I looked at her then. Really looked at her. Valeria Moretti, the only daughter of Marco Romano, the biggest drug lord in all of Europe, a man whose name alone could freeze a room. I should have expected what she said next. I don't care if you divorce her, she continued. I don't care if you forgive her. That's your business. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on my desk. What I want to know is, do you want her to die quickly? She smiled, her eyes gleaming. Or do you want her to suffer? A slow, heavy silence stretched between us. My mouth felt dry. Finally, I leaned forward, mirroring her posture. My voice came out steady, measured. I want her to suffer. Valeria's smile widened, like I had given her exactly the answer she hoped for. She stood up, smoothing the front of her coat. Good, she said, turning toward the door. And then, without another word, she smiled and left. For the next 2 weeks, Valeria and I met in quiet places. Dimly lit restaurants. Secluded park benches. Even once in the back seat of a blacked-out car. Each time, she came with updates, and each time, she reminded me that this could be over in minutes if I wanted. But that would be too easy, she said, sipping a glass of wine as we sat in a private booth at an upscale lounge. And too obvious. I nodded, pretending to be focused on my drink, but my mind was elsewhere. Valeria was methodical, ruthless, but she wasn't careless. I have to make sure your kids don't live with the shadow of this, she continued. A tragic accident is always better than a scandal. She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the deep red liquid coat the sides. Then, after a pause, she added, I wanted kids, you know. Her voice had softened, losing its usual sharpness. Jason and I tried, but he's shooting blanks. I lifted my head at that, surprised by the raw emotion in her tone. He didn't want to get tested. She went on, her jaw tightening. Kept making excuses, avoiding the subject. But I knew, and I didn't care. I loved him anyway. She exhaled, then turned her gaze to me, and he threw it all away for her. Her fingers curled into a fist on the table. I realized then that for all her ruthlessness, Valeria wasn't just acting out of vengeance. She was heartbroken. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, she pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. You need to see this. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were records, texts, emails, receipts, and something worse. My stomach twisted as I read through the details. Sophia's family knew. They had known about the affair for months. They had covered for her, lied for her. Every time she told me she was on a business trip, her mother or father had backed up her story. Her sister had even babysat for her, so she could spend weekends with Jason. I gripped the edge of the table, my fingers digging into the wood. They lied to you, Valeria said simply, watching my face. Again and again, even when they knew what it would do to you. I clenched my jaw, my breath coming out slow and measured. The betrayal was deeper than I had thought. It wasn't just Sophia. It was all of them. Now I was pissed. The day had finally arrived. Valeria called me the night before, her voice calm, almost casual. Tomorrow, she said, Jason and Sophia are meeting at my lake house. I exhaled slowly. And it's ready? She let out a soft chuckle. My men took care of everything. There was nothing else to say. We both knew what was coming. The next morning, Sophia was uncharacteristically sweet. She kissed me on the cheek as I sat at the breakfast table, a warm smile on her face. I have to leave for Chicago today, she said, sipping her coffee. I'll be back in 2 days. I looked at her, taking in the moment. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. I stood up and wrapped my arms around her. She leaned into me, unaware of the truth pressing against my chest. I'll miss you, I murmured. She laughed. It's just 2 days, James. I nodded, holding her just a little longer. Because I knew I might never see her again. Sophia and Jason arrived at the lake house later that afternoon, completely oblivious. Valeria had made sure of that. The house was beautiful, isolated, nestled deep in the woods, right by the water. The perfect place for secrecy. The perfect place for betrayal. Inside, everything looked normal, cozy, inviting. But hidden beneath the surface, it had already been turned into a death trap. Sophia and Jason wasted no time. As soon as they got to the bedroom, they fell into each other, tangled in sheets, drowning in their lust. They never noticed the shadow that slipped into the house, moving silently, methodically. The man Valeria had sent knew his job well. He turned the gas on, letting it fill the house, seeping into every corner, every crevice. Within seconds, the air was thick with it, invisible and deadly. Then came the trigger. A small spark, tiny, insignificant. And just like that, the house ignited. Flames roared to life, racing up the wooden walls, devouring everything in their path. Smoke filled the rooms, thick and choking. Sophia and Jason barely had time to react before the heat became unbearable. They ran for the doors. But every exit had already been locked from the outside. There was no way out. For 10 long minutes, the fire raged. The inferno swallowed their screams, turning them into nothing but distant echoes against the crackling wood. Then, finally, someone made the call. A man, one of Valeria's, dialed 911 with perfect timing, his voice laced with just the right amount of panic. A house is on fire by the lake. I don't know if anyone's inside. The paramedics arrived soon after. They found 2 bodies, barely alive, pulled from the wreckage. And then, they moved the 2 to the hospital. Later in the evening, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen and sighed. Sophia's father. I let it ring for a moment before answering. James, Sophia, is in the hospital. She's been badly burned. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. That's impossible, I said. She's supposed to be in Chicago. It must be someone else. A silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply. No, James, he said. It's her. She was with someone. I pretended to hesitate. Who? Another pause. It was her lover. Now do you get it? I felt a slow smile curve my lips. Her lover? I repeated. I didn't know that. I let the words sink in before adding, did you know already? Silence again. Then a defeated sigh. James, she loves you. She loves the kids. I let out a bitter laugh. She loves me. Are you sure? My grip tightened around the phone. Tell me, does your wife also go out and have sex with other men? Is that how it runs in the family? Please, James. His voice was pleading now. Go and see her. I let the silence linger between us for a few seconds, then said coldly, no, she can rot in hell for all I care. And I hung up. I ignored the first few calls from Sophia's family, but they were relentless. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Eventually, I picked up, only to be met with desperate voices, begging me to come to the hospital, to at least see her. I didn't let them finish. I unleashed every bit of rage I had. I cursed them all, one by one, with words I knew would cut deep. These were the same people who had lied to me, who had covered for Sophia's betrayal, who had played a part in making me a fool. Then, another call came in. Valeria, come with me. She said simply, I want to show you something. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. She picked me up in her sleek black car, her face unreadable. She drove in silence, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. The city lights blurred past as we headed toward the hospital. When we arrived, she led me inside, walking with purpose, like she owned the place. I followed her through the sterile, white hallways until we reached a private room. Inside, lying on the hospital bed, wrapped in bandages and covered in ointment, was Jason. His eyes fluttered open as we stepped inside. He looked weak, barely holding on. Valeria leaned in close to him, her voice dripping with venom. Look at you, you pathetic jerk, she sneered. Then, without warning, she turned to me and kissed me. Deep, slow, possessive. She pulled away just enough to smirk at Jason, her voice taunting. See, Jason, I got myself a real man. I saw the flicker of rage and helplessness in his eyes. His burned, bandaged body barely moved, but I knew he felt every word like a knife to his gut. Something dark inside me stirred. Maybe it was the months of betrayal, the humiliation, the way Sophia had chosen this man over me. Maybe it was the sheer satisfaction of seeing him helpless. So I kissed Valeria back. Heart. Jason's chest rose sharply, his breath became ragged, and suddenly, the heart monitor next to him started beeping frantically. His eyes widened in panic, his body twitching as his pulse skyrocketed. The blaring sound of the monitors sent a nurse rushing in. Please, step out, she ordered. A doctor came running down the hallway. The door swung shut behind him as he and the nurses scrambled around Jason, trying to stabilize him. Valeria and I stood outside, watching through the glass. Neither of us spoke. Minutes passed. Then, finally, the doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask with a sigh. He's no more, he said. I glanced at Valeria, a smirk playing on my lips. I didn't know a kiss could kill, I murmured. She turned to me, eyes gleaming with something dark and wicked. Then, without a word, she kissed me again, slow, deep, and intoxicating. When she finally pulled away, she whispered against my lips, Get ready, lover boy. You're going to be single by tomorrow. I let out a low chuckle. We left the hospital without looking back. The night belonged to us. Valeria stayed with me. And let's just say, there are some things that don't need elaboration. By the time the first rays of dawn crept through my bedroom window, my phone buzzed against the nightstand. I reached for it lazily, already knowing what the call was about. Mr. Carter? The voice on the other end was cautious. I'm calling from St. Augustine's Hospital. I regret to inform you that your wife, Sophia Carter, passed away early this morning. I exhaled slowly, staring at the ceiling. I'll be there, I said, then hung up. Valeria stretched beside me, her fingers tracing my chest. Well, she said, voice husky from sleep. Guess I wasn't lying. I didn't respond. I just got up, got dressed, and drove to the hospital. When I arrived, the air was thick with grief. Nurses walked by in hushed tones, the scent of antiseptic clinging to everything. I went straight to the front desk, signed the necessary documents, and just as I was about to leave, I saw him, Sophia's father. He was standing by the waiting area, his face a mess of tears and exhaustion. The moment he saw me, his grief turned to rage. Now you come? He shouted, storming toward me, eyes red and wild. Now she's dead, James. She's gone. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I let him close the distance between us before I spoke, my voice calm and cold. I didn't kill her, I said, watching as his chest heaved with anger. She died on her own, his hands balled into fists at his sides. No, he snapped. You should have been more careful with her. I let out a low laugh, shaking my head. No, I shot back, stepping closer. You should have raised a better daughter. That was the last straw. He swung at me, but grief made him sloppy. I stepped back just in time, dodging his punch with ease. And then, before he could even regain his balance, I landed one of my own. The impact sent him staggering back, his breath catching as he clutched his jaw. I stood over him, my voice steady, final. Our relationship died with your daughter. Stay away from my family. He stared at me, chest rising and falling rapidly, too stunned to respond. I turned my back on him. You can take your daughter's body and bury it wherever you want, I added over my shoulder. I won't claim it. And with that, I walked away. 5 months later, I married Valeria. It wasn't a grand affair. No white doves, no emotional vows in front of hundreds. Just us, a select few, and a quiet ceremony that marked the beginning of something neither of us had planned, but both of us welcomed. If there was one thing I knew, one thing I had to be careful about, it was that I had to be faithful to her. Valeria was not the kind of woman you betray. She had made that very clear, not through threats, but through the unspoken understanding between us. She gave me everything, her loyalty, her protection, her love, and in return, she expected the same. Our honeymoon was in Paris, a city draped in romance and old stories. We walked along the Seine, dined at hidden bistros where the wine was richer than sin, and spent nights tangled in silk sheets, the city lights flickering outside our window. My son, Ethan, was with us. He adored Valeria, and strangely, she adored him too. I had wondered if she would, if a woman like her could soften for a child that wasn't hers, but she did. She had her own way of showing love, firm, protective, fierce. She would die for him. I knew that. A few months later, Valeria and I welcomed our son Daniel. He had her sharp features, my eyes, and a birthright of power and fearlessness that could only come from the woman who bore him. Life is good. Now for the second story. I had always believed that providing for my family was my duty. I worked long hours, pushed myself beyond exhaustion, and sacrificed my own desires to ensure that my wife and our household had everything they needed. I never asked for much in return, just a little appreciation, a kind word, or some acknowledgement that my efforts mattered. But that night, I learned a painful truth. My sacrifices weren't valued. They were simply expected. It had been a grueling day at work, the weight of endless responsibilities pressing down on me as I stepped through the front door. The house was spotless, and the scent of dinner filled the air, yet something felt off. I was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally drained from carrying the entire burden alone. I sank onto the couch beside my wife, rubbing my temples. Today was rough, I muttered, hoping for some sympathy. She didn't even look up from her phone. Instead, she sighed and said, "You're supposed to provide, not complain." The words sliced through me like a blade. I turned to her, searching for any sign of regret, some indication that she hadn't meant it that way. But there was nothing, just the soft glow of her phone illuminating her indifferent expression. A slow realization settled over me, chilling me to my core. For years, I had been wearing myself down to make sure she had everything she needed. Yet in her eyes, I was nothing more than a machine, a provider, not a person. My exhaustion, my struggles, my sacrifices, they didn't matter. My only role was to keep working and keep giving. Something inside me shifted, not in an explosion of anger, but in a quiet, resolute way. If I was nothing more than a provider to her, what would happen if I stopped? Without another word, I stood up and walked to the bedroom, my mind racing. That single sentence had broken something deep inside me, something that could never be put back together the same way. For the first time, I questioned everything, my role, my worth, and most of all, the foundation of my marriage. If she only saw me as a provider, then I would step away from that role, no more sacrificing myself for someone who saw my efforts as an obligation. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, clarity. Change was coming. And this time, I wasn't looking back, not out of anger, not to punish her, but to reclaim my own sense of self-worth. I started small. At breakfast, she casually mentioned an upcoming spa day with her friends. One of her regular indulgences that I had always funded without question. I would have handed over my card without a second thought. But this time, I simply said, "I'm sure you'll figure something out." She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I shrugged, taking a sip of my coffee. "I've decided to reevaluate my spending. I think it's time I focus more on savings and personal goals." There was a brief, awkward pause before she brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, come on. It's just a spa day. We can afford it." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm making some changes." Her laughter faded as she studied me, sensing something was different. But I didn't elaborate. That was the moment the shift began. Over the next few days, I gradually pulled back. I stopped picking up extra shifts at work. I no longer covered every expense automatically. I didn't argue or explain. I simply adjusted my behavior. When she brought up a weekend getaway she wanted to book, I answered casually, "I don't think that's in my budget right now." She scoffed. "Your budget? You've never talked like this before. What's going on?" I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "I've spent so much time providing that I forgot to prioritize myself." "That's changing." For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. The foundation she had taken for granted was beginning to shift beneath her feet, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. At first, she acted as if nothing had changed, assuming this was just a phase. She still booked her usual beauty appointments, filled her online shopping carts, and carried on as though our lifestyle would continue as it always had. But then, reality set in. The spa days, the impromptu shopping sprees, the effortless luxuries. Without my automatic financial support, they started to dwindle. She still hadn't apologized for what she said that night, but I wasn't waiting for it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally regaining mine. Then, one evening, she stood in the doorway of our bedroom, a mixture of confusion and irritation in her voice. "The card was declined today." I barely looked up from my book. "That's strange." "Yeah, strange," she echoed, waiting for me to offer a solution. When I didn't, she stepped further into the room. "Did you forget to pay it?" I turned a page in my book. "No, I just didn't see the need to cover unnecessary expenses this month." The silence between us thickened. "Unnecessary expenses?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. I finally met her gaze. "The spa days, the designer handbags, the endless subscriptions. They're not my priority anymore." Her eyes narrowed. "Since when?" "Since I realized I was nothing more than a wallet to you." Her mouth opened, then closed again. I could see the gears turning in her head, the slow realization sinking in. My support had never been unconditional. It wasn't an infinite resource. It could be withdrawn just as easily as it had been given. The next few weeks unraveled everything. The luxuries she had taken for granted vanished one by one. She had to cook instead of ordering takeout. She had to check price tags before making purchases. The car she used for errands? She had to start contributing to its maintenance. And then came the arguments. They weren't loud, not yet, but they were tense. "I don't understand why you're acting like this," she said one evening as we sat in the dim glow of the living room. "You always handled everything before. Why change now?" "Because before, I thought I was appreciated. Now I know better." She crossed her arms. "So this is some kind of punishment?" I exhaled sharply. "No, it's a correction." For the first time, she looked genuinely worried. Not just annoyed. Not just inconvenienced. Worried. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand. But understanding wasn't enough. The real question was, would she change? She tried to ignore the shift at first, brushing it off as a temporary mood. A phase I would grow out of. But the days stretched into weeks, and my stance remained firm. I had stopped being the unquestioning provider, and she had started to feel the weight of reality. At first, she resorted to subtle manipulation. She would sigh heavily when looking at an online shopping cart, glancing at me as if expecting me to cave. She talked about how stressful her days were, how she just needed a little relief, thinly veiled attempts to coax me back into my old habits. But I wasn't biting. I simply nodded, offered a few neutral words of support, and carried on with my life. Then she tried bargaining. "I'll cut down on shopping if you start handling the bills again," she suggested one night at dinner, twirling her fork in her pasta. Her tone was light, but her eyes were watchful. I took a sip of my drink. I think it's good for both of us to be involved in the finances. That way we both understand the value of what we're spending. Her lips pressed into a thin line. It's always been easier when you took care of it. Easier for who? I asked calmly. She had no response. As time passed, she began to realize that my change was permanent. And with that realization came frustration. She snapped at small things. How I didn't rush to fix things around the house anymore. How I no longer planned elaborate date nights, or gave in to her whims. You're being petty, she accused one night, arms crossed. I'm being fair, I corrected her. I spent years making sure you never had to worry about anything. Now I think it's time you see what that felt like for me. That was when the panic set in. She started taking on more responsibility, but not out of a sense of fairness, out of fear. She was terrified of what losing control over me meant. She began cooking more, paying attention to bills, making an effort to keep things running smoothly. But it wasn't enough. It never could be. Because she wasn't doing it out of love or respect. She was doing it because she felt the ground shifting beneath her and was desperate to regain her footing. I watched, not with anger, not with glee, but with quiet certainty. The tables had turned. The only question left was whether she would change, or if she would simply resent me for no longer playing my part in her perfect world. The tension in our home had become unbearable. The quiet glances, the stiff conversations, the forced politeness. It all felt like we were two strangers playing house. She had stopped asking me for money outright, but I could tell she resented the change. One evening, as I sat in the living room reading, she finally snapped. I don't understand, she said, her voice a mix of frustration and desperation. Why are you doing this? Why are you acting like we're enemies? I set my book down and looked at her, really looked at her. I'm not your enemy, I said. I just stopped playing the role you assigned me. She scoffed, folding her arms. You're making this sound like some kind of conspiracy. All I ever wanted was for things to run smoothly. No, I corrected. You wanted things to run smoothly for you. You never considered what it was costing me. Her expression faltered. For the first time, I saw something other than irritation, something closer to guilt. I never asked you to suffer, she whispered. I sighed, leaning back into my chair. You never had to. You just assumed I would handle everything. And for years, I did. But the moment I told you how exhausted I was, you dismissed me, told me I was supposed to provide, not complain. That was the moment I realized you never saw me as a person with limits, just a resource. She shook her head. That's not fair, isn't it? I challenged. Tell me, if I had never changed, would you have? Would you have ever stopped expecting me to handle everything? Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. For the first time, she had no defense, no quick retort, no way to spin it. The realization sank in, slow and painful. Maybe she wasn't cruel. Maybe she wasn't manipulative in the way villains are in stories. Maybe she had simply been selfish in a way she never recognized until now. She swallowed hard. I don't know. I nodded, as if that answer was enough. Maybe it was. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for her to change. I was deciding if I even cared if she did. The weight of our conversation lingered for days. She was quieter, more contemplative, as if finally confronting the truth she had refused to see. I noticed the way she hesitated before speaking, the way her eyes darted to me, searching for some sign that things could go back to the way they were. But I had already accepted that they never would. One evening, as I grabbed my bag and headed for the gym, she finally spoke. Can we talk? Her voice was softer than I had heard in a long time. I paused, adjusting the strap over my shoulder. I'm listening. She swallowed, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I was wrong about everything. About you. About the way I treated you. About how much I expected without ever giving enough in return. She took a shaky breath, her voice unsteady. I don't want to lose you, but I know I might have already. Her words should have meant something. Once they would have. But now, I felt nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I had spent so long waiting for this acknowledgement that I no longer needed it. What changed? I asked, my tone calm, steady. She hesitated. I started thinking about what life would be like without you. About doing it all alone. She exhaled shakily, and it scared me. I sighed, shaking my head. That's the problem. You're not afraid of losing me. You're afraid of losing the comfort I provided. Her eyes widened. That's not, isn't it? I cut in. You never really saw me. Not for who I was. And now that you're facing the reality of standing on your own, you suddenly realized my worth. She fell silent. And in that silence, I found all the answers I needed. I had already made my decision. I don't want an apology born out of fear. I said finally. I wanted respect. And if you couldn't give it when I needed it most, how can I believe it now? Her breath hitched. So that's it. We're done. I didn't answer right away because, truthfully, I didn't know. I need time, I said at last. And I think you do too. Without another word, I left. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. Days stretched into weeks, and in that time, I embraced the quiet. No longer burdened by expectations that had drained me, I focused on myself, on rebuilding, on rediscovering the person I had been before I became just a provider. I spent more time at the gym, picked up old hobbies I had abandoned, reconnected with friends I had neglected over the years. There was a freedom in making choices that served only me, in stepping away from a role I no longer believed in. She reached out a few times, a text here, a call there. Her words were softer, her tone subdued. But I wasn't in a hurry to respond. I needed space to see if her change was real or if it was just the fear of losing comfort disguised as regret. Weeks had passed since our last conversation when, one evening, there was a knock at my door. I hesitated before opening it, uncertain of what I would find on the other side. When I did, she stood there, physically the same, yet something in her had shifted. She carried herself differently, less entitled, more vulnerable. I've been thinking a lot, she admitted, clasping her hands together. About everything. About how I took you for granted. About how unfair I was to you. And I don't want to be that person anymore. I studied her for a long moment. And what if you can't change? What if this is just guilt talking? She exhaled sharply. Then I'll prove to you that it isn't. But I don't expect you to just believe me. I want to try. And if you don't want that, I'll understand. For the first time, she wasn't demanding. She wasn't assuming I would fall back into old patterns. And that, more than anything, made me pause. Maybe she had truly realized something. Maybe she hadn't. But the difference now was that I knew my worth. I knew what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. I stepped aside, holding the door open just slightly. Let's start with a conversation. No promises, just honesty. She nodded, stepping inside. And just like that, a new beginning unfolded. Not out of obligation or expectation, but by choice. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.